We're going to talk about hiking the C&O Canal Path, or part of it. And then when we get done the part I hiked, I can talk a little bit about the part I didn't hike and some other fun things to do up here when you decide to do it. So we'll be talking about where this thing is, a little bit about the history, and our day-to-day hike to Harpers Ferry. So the C&O Canal started in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown and goes up to Harpers Ferry, then continues on up in Maryland all the way to Cumberland, Maryland. So the whole thing's about 180 miles. It's 60 miles to from D.C. to Harpers Ferry. Now, of course, prior to the railroad, excuse me, waterways were probably the major way for people to get around. And George Washington had scouted this trip a little bit, parallels the Potomac River up into Maryland, and talked about putting a canal in westward because although this isn't the real Cumberland Gap, the real Cumberland Gap through the mountains was in Virginia, but this was a kind of an easy access into the west.
Really?
So,
What do you see?
please, I can't mute everybody, so please be quiet. So work began in 1828 at the exact same time that the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad laid its cornerstone in Baltimore to run a railroad up along the same path. And so we got,
Are they ready?
got kind of old technology, the canal, running along the new technology right at about the same time.
And then there's ones that are red. And then there's something that I think are going to be berries because
I'm sorry, folks. I hate this, but I can't find the mute all button. I don't know where it is. Usually it's here. So the canal was completed to Harpers Ferry in 1833. Then the B&O Canal beat the canal to Cumberland by 8 years. And then the canal was completed in 1850. The canal really got slowed down toward the end where they had to build a 3,000-foot tunnel. And so that really slowed them down. They thought it was going to take a few years, and it took like 8 years. By the way, this picture will be familiar because you'll see a picture later on of me in Georgetown walking the exact same place where this old-time picture is. So the canal, normally about 50 feet wide, 6 feet deep, 184 miles long. Aqueducts, which I hadn't really been familiar with, but when the canal comes across a creek, the canal's got to go on a bridge over the creek. And so the aqueducts were built to build a waterway over another waterway, which is interesting. 7 dams to provide water, 74 locks. It gains about 605 feet as it goes up. A couple places like Great Falls and places like that, it gains quite a bit of elevation in a hurry, so there's a series of locks. And then I mentioned briefly the 3,000-foot tunnel. That's not on the section we hiked, but that really slowed construction down. It was running until the 20s. It was certainly important during the early history of bringing supplies from the west to the east and helping to settle the west. It was a key waterway, and Harpers Ferry was a strategic point during the Civil War. And so there was a lot of history there about that. But the canal really kind of ran out of use. The trains, of course, were much more reliable. There were dry spells where they had water problems, freezes, floods, maintenance on the aqueducts would get flooded out and that sort of thing. And so it really stopped in 1924. And the B&O Railroad, who was building the railroad right here alongside of the canal, bought the land. So the bad guy got the land, but not for too long, because later on in the Depression, the B&O had to sell all that canal land back to the U.S. to satisfy debt. So in 29, from 29 on, the canal land sat there, and around wars and that sort of stuff, they tried to figure out what to do with it. Well, should we build a highway there? Should we reopen the canal? Should we pave it all over? Should we build a fast train? And none of these ideas ever got anywhere. It just sat there. In 1954, Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas brought attention to the path. And you can imagine a Supreme Court justice doing this today. Anyway, he led an 8-day walk along the canal to advocate for its preservation. And here he is leading a group of people. And here's some signs and that sort of stuff, being greeted by somebody. And so he brought attention to the canal path and said, let's preserve this thing. There's a lot of history here. Most of the lock mechanisms are still there, not really functional. A lot of the old houses for the lock masters. And so he led the way for preservation. It worked, like I said, slowly. Finally, in 1971, Nixon signed a bill making it a National Historic Park. So here's a look at the canal path again, Washington, D.C., Harpers Ferry, and kind of what our itinerary was. So there's our daily itinerary in miles. Day one, of course, we started late because my son lives out in Arlington. We took a train into D.C. and then took the tube over near Georgetown and walked to the beginning. So we got started a little late. But one thing I want to point out here is you're only supposed to camp in regular campsites, and they're kind of spread out. They might be maybe more designed for people that bike this canal than those that hike it. And when you look at use on this thing, it's a big cyclist canal or path, a lot more than hikers. And so campsites are a little spread out. Of course, it's pretty flat and stuff, as you'll see, but still, we're putting on some miles during some of these days. So these red arrows just showed you about where we stopped. So this is day one. We had to use we bought a book, a trail guide, a trail book that covers the C&O Canal and another path I want to talk about, the Great Allegheny Passage. And we had to use directions in there to find mile zero. But we eventually wound around kind of near the swamp and stuff, as you recall, Christine, finally found the mile zero post so we could start at the right place.
It's actually like hidden by where they have the boats. They have like these crew boats, and we had to really search for the mile zero. It was not easy to find.
Yeah, there's a big center there for crew racing and crew training there. We had to look around past it. So starting off, we're going through old Georgetown. This is that same bridge you saw in that old timey picture right here, except there's a Cisco sign there and stuff like that. But so we start off kind of downtown Georgetown. M Street is up this way a couple of blocks, and so it's a pretty hike through there. So we're only, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 blocks west of the White House on M Street where it starts off.
I think we were near some of the places you used to go listen to blues when you were a kid, you told me.
What's that?
We were right in DC where you used to go listen to blues. We were like right in the heart of Georgetown.
That's right, yeah, right. M Street was a lot of bars I went to back in the day. We also hiked back the old hotel that I used to bellhop in. Early on, we came across the Abner Cloud House. That's the oldest house on the canal, built in 1801. It's closed up, but there's a historical marker there and stuff like that. And then we came across one of the original markers on the towpath. This reads 4 miles to WC, which is Washington City, and that's what Washington D.C. used to be called, was Washington City. And then the path is marked with modern mile markers like this. This is where President Quincy Adams broke ground for the C&O Canal in 1828. And you can see it's a lock here. So, we go by lots of locks. Like, this wasn't that far down there. We've already hit lock 6. There's 74 locks on the canal. Just a nice, pretty walk along the tow path. Then we came to 7 locks where the elevation changes quite a bit in 1.5 miles. So there's a series of locks one after another. These are swing gate locks. None of this stuff works anymore, I don't think, but it's all there. There's a swing gate lock. And then there's Christy goofing around on the vertical gate lock where they wind this and the gate would go down into the water so the boats could come in, then the lock would go back up. So you've got lots of locks and history to walk by. Most of these locks also have the old lock house there where the family lived and tended the lock. Let's see, let's go back to day 1. We had to go quite a ways. The only campground we get to was a family campground that's reserved for scouts and that sort of stuff. But we went in mid-May and there wasn't anybody else on the trail. So the Park Service let us camp there. So we had a nice campground there. And that was the one day that it rained. Now, prior to our hike, it had rained, I think, 24 straight days in DC. And we said, oh man, but it only rained on that one night, but they had these beautiful, large, spacious porta potties. And so Christy hopped in the girls' one, I hopped in the boys' one, and we just waited out the rain. And then we were able to set up tents and camp.
They worked really well. We took a nap because it was hours. They were very clean, thank goodness. And that was the only shelter on the entire trail.
That's
for
right.
Those porta potties in the beginning.
That was it. Second day, a little longer, but you can see we still got, eventually when you hike up here, you're going to run out of water in there unless there's been a lot of rain, which there had been, but we still got water in there. We came to this area that was called Wide Water, and this is where the Potomac River, which is down here on our left, would often flood. And so they built this log dam here to control the flooding and capture water for the canal. So quite a construction engineering project in this area. There's a lock tender's home. A little further on, we came to Great Falls. Great Falls got 6 locks, and Great Falls is a great place to visit. Now, the Great Falls Park is on the other side, but there's a nice walkway where we could walk out and take a look at the falls and take a look at the Potomac at that point. It's pretty nice. This is one of the aqueducts. So this is a waterway that goes over Seneca Creek, and this stone here was quarried at the same place that the red stone was quarried for the original Smithsonian buildings that you see along the mall. Day 3 was 16 miles, but Christy, isn't this where the mile markers were messed up and we realized we were dead tired and we realized we had 3 miles to go? We thought we were there and we had extra about 3 miles to go.
Somewhere they're missing a mile and they get a little off. Yeah. And so that was one day that I think we thought was a shorter, this was the really long day.
Yeah.
16.4.
But you can make it longer by side trips to Leesburg or Brunswick, which are 2 charming little towns that aren't too far off the trail. Certainly if you're biking this, you would have time to do that.
And this is where it starts, if I recall, it starts to get kind of overgrown. Everything's very manicured before that point. It starts to sort of deteriorate in maintenance in a very interesting way from there.
Yeah. Riley's Lock House, it wasn't open when we were there, but in the summertime, they'll have scouts in here and you can tour this Riley's Lock House and stuff like that, which is kind of neat. That was a pretty stop. Another aqueduct. This one was a long one and it had been destroyed a few years earlier and had to be rebuilt. So normally there'd be water in here and you'd have the barges coming through along this waterway. Next day, just a short little 12.5 miles. You notice it's all flat and it's gravelly here. Not too bad for bicycles and certainly easy hiking, and awfully pretty all along the way. Some places you'll open up and get a view of the Potomac. Another aqueduct.
And all of the campsites are on the Potomac, I believe, right? Everywhere
yeah.
we camped was
Yeah,
in between the canal and the Potomac.
Yeah, because the towpath is on that side. So we're kind of heading north, and so on the west side is the river. On the east side was the railroad that was being built along the way. And we got to Harpers Ferry, where the Potomac and the Shenandoah rivers come together, and I've got a better picture of that. And the site of John Brown's raid in 1859, which was completely unsuccessful, but put the fear of the Lord in all those slaveholders, and really did a lot to move things along as far as the Civil War and getting rid of slavery. So we meet the junction of the Appalachian Trail, and on one of my Appalachian Trail hikes, I started in Harpers Ferry and hiked across the river and hiked I don't know, it's only about 50 feet of the canal path before you turn up and go up on the Appalachian Trail. But I thought, man, this is a neat trail. That's probably what stuck in my mind to come back and hike that one of these days. So that's Christy looking at the map that shows the Appalachian Trail and stuff. And there's the mile marker 60. This is a pedestrian bridge that goes across the Potomac from the canal to the town of Harpers Ferry. And this is traveled by a zillion AT hikers every year. Last year, there was a train that derailed on the bridge and destroyed this walkway. And this walkway was destroyed for 9, 10, 11 months. So all the Appalachian Trail hikers, when they got to Harpers Ferry, had to go way, way around to a bridge that would take them back around and be able to hook up again with the Appalachian Trail. So it was really took a long time. It's finally been fixed. I think the railroad paid for fixing it like they should have since they broke it. So it's back in operation. The town is a great town. A lot of the town is a national park. And like I say, it's a critical location because of the two rivers, the border between North and South, the state borders there, Maryland and West Virginia and Kentucky. You can see Thomas Jefferson thought the site was stupendous. Worth the voyage across the Atlantic just to see it. And I'll show you that in a minute. So you can tour a lot of the town. There's a lot of history about John Brown's raid here. And you can walk around and tour that. Also, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's headquarters is in Harpers Ferry. And so they've got their headquarters building and a little store up on the hill. I'll show you where that is in a second. So it's quite a place. So this is from the Appalachian Trail after you climb up out of the valley, looking down. This is the railroad bridge and the walkway that goes across. So the canal runs down here along the river. This is the Shenandoah River coming in. And then this is the Potomac River. So you can see Harpers Ferry sits in a beautiful site there. So the old town is all down here. The Appalachian Trail headquarters is up here. I believe it's that building. So it's up the hill a little bit. The Appalachian Trail comes up this way, down through town, then across the bridge, and then heads on north. So that's kind of how the Appalachian Trail runs. So it's a pretty view from up there. Whoops. I stole this picture, so I don't know who that is.
He said he stole this picture, so he doesn't know who that is. This is Harpers Ferry. The trail goes across the bridge. I mean, he hiked like 160 miles, whatever it was.
Okay. 60 miles. We hiked 60 miles. Okay, so let's take a look at what's on the other side of Harpers Ferry. Christy, when I started putting this together, I started thinking about it. But anyway,
I'm ready.
Because my niece lives right here, and she could get us down to the trail. So what we didn't do yet was the last 120 miles that goes to Cumberland, Maryland from Harpers Ferry. Still relatively flat. Obviously it's a canal, so it has to be. 44 more locks to look at, 8 more aqueducts to look at. Right here in Paw Paw is that 3,100-foot tunnel that they blasted through the mountain for the canal. And there's several interesting pre-revolutionary towns here to look at. And then when you get to Cumberland, you can have access to the Great Allegheny Passage. And so let's take a quick look at that. This follows an old railroad bed all the way to Pittsburgh. So it's about 150 miles. So like if you want to bike something, for instance, or hike it, you can go from DC all the way to Pittsburgh. And this trail again is relatively flat. It's a railroad trail. There's a little bit of a climb coming out of Cumberland, but the gain is the slope is small, and it's not that much of a gain. And then it's flat the rest of the way, all the way up to Pittsburgh. Now in Pittsburgh, I think they've funded and begun to look at building a 220-mile rail trail from Pittsburgh to Cleveland. So pretty soon, you'll be able to go from DC all the way to Cleveland. Of course, my wife said there's nothing in Cleveland to look at, but I don't know. I think that would be kind of neat. And certainly, sorry. I hurt somebody's feelings there. Anyway, so that would be great. And this thing is well on the way to being planned and funded. And I don't think there's that much to do since the railroad bed is there. And so keep an eye out. And I don't know if they've named that trail yet, but anyway, so that would be kind of neat too. So after a short little 60-mile hike, we enjoyed a cheeseburger there in Harpers Ferry before we took the train back. And the bus station or the train station's right there. Took a train right back to Union Station.